Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us as we kick off Specright's new webinar series, Specright Unpacked. Without further ado, let's get right into it. My name is Grace Sneed. I am a sales development representative at Specright. I spend my days reaching out to companies in an effort to educate them on the value of specification data management. Prior to working at Specright, I worked as a packaging engineer for two CPG companies, giving me a unique perspective on data management. I immediately saw the value in Specright because I experienced firsthand the difficulties of not having a centralized system to store data. Also joining us today is Linda Garbies. Linda works closely with customers and prospects within her sales engineer role at Specright. Linda utilizes her background in product development engineering and project management to help create efficient solutions for end users. In her role as project development manager, Linda developed processes and led a development team for a large food packaging organization. Throughout her career, Linda has placed an unwavering focus on customers and process improvement. For our agenda, we will give an overview of what to expect from Specright Unpacked, as well as the goals of the series. We will also touch on the daily responsibilities of a packaging engineer and how a centralized data system addresses these pain points that professionals experience. Linda will then walk us through a high-level demonstration of Specright's capabilities that set us apart from any other ERP or PLM system. We will highlight why specification data management is crucial to success in the role of a packaging engineer. We will then come back together at the end to summarize how Specright improves efficiency in your workday and increases a product's speed to market, all while saving your company valuable money and time. Please jot down your questions or submit them in the chat as we go, as we will have a live Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. We encourage everyone to participate. To kick it off, I would like to give a general overview of Specright Unpacked series. This series aims to relate to packaging engineering professionals by addressing common challenges and frustrations faced in their day-to-day tasks. We will present how Specright addresses these pain points, and each month we will introduce a special guest in an effort to gain different perspectives on the need for a specification data management platform. Now for a day in the life of a packaging engineer. If you are a packaging engineer or work closely with packaging engineering teams, this should all be familiar to you. I'm going to walk through each responsibility for those of you who are not as familiar. Packaging engineers are responsible for the individual packaging component specifications. These specifications include granular details of a component, along with owning the individual component packaging spec. They are also responsible for building out the BOM for a SKU, meaning it is their job to determine component compatibility. As an example, does X bottle fit with X cap? Component compatibility is determined by measurements on the specification drawing. Not only do packaging engineers have to determine the fit of components, they also need to ensure that there will be no adverse effects when the product or formula is introduced and that the product will arrive to its destination safely. This introduces compatibility testing and ship testing. Lastly, when a new component is sourced, a part number is needed to reference that item. Packaging engineers are responsible for creating that part number for the item so that item can be called out in the BOM. This part number becomes the name of the component to be saved in your system. Instead of calling out shape, size, and color of a component, we standardize the nomenclature so when bottle number 41505 is referenced, there is no confusion as to what component is being called out. Now that we understand a day in the life of a packaging engineer, let's move on to some of the things that make their jobs a little more difficult than they need to be. We feel your pain. Storing specifications in a shared drive leads to disorganization. Missing specifications are common as there is no traceability as to who added each specification to the folder and when it was added. This leads you to manually click into each specification and manually search for the date on the document to determine when the supplier provided the latest version of the spec. This may also lead to outdated specifications as there is no system telling you that your spec is approaching its 15th birthday. If you find that you are missing a specification, that component that is supposed to be a part of your portfolio is essentially useless. How are you going to determine that X bottle fits with X cap if you don't have a spec for the bottle? Which leads to yet another problem. How are you going to get that spec? You now have to work with procurement, as most procurement teams own the relationship with the supplier. Procurement has to request the specification from the supplier via email. Let's say that your point of contact at the supplier is out on vacation for the week. You cannot obtain the specification, and therefore your project is delayed until further notice. And because the delay is happening outside of your company, you have no control over when you will receive that specification. Could be days, weeks, or even months. During my time as a packaging engineer, I unfortunately worked with some pretty unresponsive suppliers. I wish I was lying when I tell you that I requested a corrugate spec from a supplier at the end of August, and that specification was not in my inbox until the middle of November. Never mind the time it takes you to obtain a specification. How are you calling out that specification to your supplier? Let's reference back to bottle number 41505. Bottle 41505 only means something to employees at your company. Your suppliers are not aware of what you named a particular component. This may cause back and forth emails trying to explain the component spec you aim to receive. Without a specification, these descriptors are extremely vague. There are no measurements to be called out, but rather general details like color, shape, and size of a component. Let's say descriptions aren't enough and they want to know the last time that component was ordered. As a packaging engineer, you're not privy to that information. So now we are getting planning and purchasing teams involved to trace back in the very manual system when bottle 41505 was last ordered. This back and forth process on average takes about 2 weeks, and that's just for one specification. Imagine if there are 10 specifications that you can't locate. Think about how much time that would set back a project. Most companies aim to consolidate their component portfolio as that drives cost savings. Consolidating becomes near impossible if you can't locate your component specifications. The implementation of a spec system takes the guesswork out of who and when did someone last update a specification. Like I mentioned earlier, packaging engineers are responsible for the creation of a component's part number. Items have to be approved by all departments. That's procurement, planning, finance, graphics. Get ready to send out daily reminders to those teams via email to get a component approved, because these approvals, unfortunately, happen in a different system. Your emails are essentially requests for your colleagues to stop their day, log into yet another system, and click a button. An extra system for one simple task creates more logins, more clicks, and more work for everyone at that company. Because packaging owns the BOM for finished goods, they're also responsible for making changes to the BOM. This request often comes from planning if a component runs out, or it may come from procurement if they need to pivot suppliers. BOM changes become quite time-consuming and manual if you need to update 50 different SKUs that all use the same component you're aiming to change. With Specright's patent many-to-many feature, that information is manually changed just once and automatically updates the SKUs that use the component. As most of you know, there is extensive information that is needed to be able to produce a finished good, the BOM being the most obvious. But what about the die lines for the artwork? What about the artwork itself? The corrugate, the pallet configuration, the formula's ingredients, the ship testing documents, formula packaging compatibility testing information, the suppliers in which each component is coming from. The list goes on. Without Specright, gathering each piece of information can take up to an hour. With Specright, all that information is pulled into a single source of truth platform, making Specright a one-stop shop for all SKU information. We will now turn to Linda to show us how Specright alleviates the pain points of a packaging professional.
Perfect. Thanks, Grace. Appreciate you walking us through many of the challenges, packaging engineers are encountering in their day-to-day. So let's go ahead and jump in. Specright is really a flexible solution that's going to allow you to track all of that granular detail that you were mentioning to require you to be successful in your day-to-day packaging role. So here we'll jump in and we'll go ahead and look at some various reports in our dashboard that allow us to view the data we're tracking within the system. Of course, all of this can be configured based on the data and all of the individuals who are accessing the system. So if you're in a packaging engineering role, you may be more interested in seeing things like packaging material by weight by item, or maybe some of the sustainability information as we look at some of these different charts and data points here. Users can also subscribe to this information. So all of these reports are going to be continually updated. When you're talking about specifications, these are not static documents. As you mentioned, you're going to get new information from your suppliers. You're going to be continuously updating your database. So you're going to want to make sure that you have all of this information at your fingertips. So subscribing to dashboards is always helpful for people who are in the system or out of the system. You can receive all of these updates at a designated cadence. It's going to allow you to really know what is going on within your spec database, keep all of your information in one place. Great. Across the top of your screen, we do have a global search bar. This is going to be very helpful when you're looking for data. So one aspect and one pain point is definitely inputting data, making sure you have all of the data, but how do you find all of that data once you have it input into the system? So here we can go ahead and enter very generic terms such as, corrugate into our search bar here, and it'll show you all of our different specifications that utilize the word corrugate, also any files that contain the word corrugate. But even within these files, we can search and look within the title block. So if you receive documents from your supply chain that maybe they call things a different name, you mentioned different, part numbers, different ways of referencing their information, there may be a PDF that's within your system that can help you pinpoint, instead of going back and forth via email with your vendor, to really just understand, oh, this is actually the specification that they're talking about. They call it this number. In our system, we have it listed as a different number. So you can really have those even captured as separate fields as we jump into the specification. But if it were to get lost in maybe a document, you'd be able to search there. Another search capability with Specright is the Like Item Finder tool. So the Like Item Finder tool is going to allow you to look very precisely at different data points. So Specright is template driven, which allows users the flexibility to have different fields for each one of their packaging types and then searchable within the Like Item Finder tool. So here, if we were to look at, say, a bottle specification, the fields on the left side of my screen were updated. They'll reflect bottle-specific fields, such as brim fill capacity or neck finish. Whereas if I were to search for, say, a corrugated specification, it's going to update and ask me things like FSC certification. I could input, length, width, and depth, and also within certain tolerancing. This is going to allow you to really, and as I'm updating those fields, you'll notice the right side of my screen is also updating with very specific data based on the search parameters that I'm entering. So this is going to allow you to see specifications in your system that are matching the criteria that you're specifying. Now, with our patent and many-to-many relationships between our specifications, we can also quickly see everywhere this packaging item is going to be used. And note that everything is always hyperlinked, that we can always jump into it so we can get some more information. So on the far right-hand side of our screen, we have this magnifying glass. Clicking that allows me to quickly see, oh, these are all the finished goods that are currently using this corrugated specification. Users have found this transparency really just allows them to be proactive in their supply chain versus reactive in situations such as, new legislation, maybe in sustainability being passed, or even, as simple as weather alerts, looking where your supply chain is and seeing how it's going to impact different elements. So let's go ahead and jump into this corrugate specification. We can quickly see that we have several relationships or connections created. Those are going to be indicated by the little numbers here. That's really just signifying those many-to-many relationships. These connection points will allow you to make an update to a specification. So if I were to update this corrugate specification, it's going to then be able to implement in all of the different bill of materials that are associated with this corrugated specification. I don't have to open all 9 of these finished goods specifications to update the corrugated specification. I could just make the updates once on the specification that I'm currently on, and it'll push all of those through the relationship to our finished good. So we'll know that there was updates there. You can always see what changes are going to be made on your specifications on the history tab. This is also a very common pain point we hear about is, changes were made. I don't know what the old value was, the new value. This is also going to outline the user who made the changes, when that change was made, the specific field that was updated. If in the future you want to share these specifications and have different interactions with your suppliers, if they were to make changes to specifications, there's different ways to see that within the system. Also, if you do version your specifications, you'll have great transparency throughout the system to do side-by-side comparisons and see how the evolution of your specs have changed throughout the duration of that specification. Now, as I'm just touching on history, Grace mentioned in the upfront about like who approved it, when was it approved. We can always quickly see who approved different specifications, when it was approved, what team members had any comments that were made throughout the approval process. And we'll always quickly be able to see what the status of specifications are on the screen as well. So single source of truth is always important and something that Specright really tries to hone in on with our user base. And that's really that the specification database can be difficult within organizations when they are siloed from other systems. So Specright has an open API, which allows the platform to easily connect with external systems as well. You can also just import different data points into the system. Really just getting that data to be in your single source of truth is really what is important. So here in this instance, a connection point with, say, a system like an ERP could be for cost or maybe quantity. And this is going to allow you to really automate your specification creation or maybe complete or enhance the single source of truth we're creating. So for example, those volumes and costs can be automatically pushed from your ERP system, and then you could use that for calculated fields. So here we'll see this calculated field. There's no little pencil. We can hover over it and know what these calculations are conducting. Now, those could then be rolled up into different reports and provide a level of transparency within your organization if you're tracking things like maybe recycled content or virgin material being used throughout your specification. Another example that Grace mentioned was about the numbering system and prefixes and standardization. Standardization is really important when you're talking within your spec system. So we do have auto numbering systems that can be triggered based on the type of packaging you're doing. So if we're doing corrugated items, maybe it begins with RSC. Here, this is an editable field, so maybe that could be changed. In our case here with our supplier documents, you'll notice if I try to update the supplier document, it actually has a pre-programmed SD prefix and a numbering system that follows that. So this is going to standardize based on the type of specification being created. So that could easily be implemented and standardized and also configured based on the language and nomenclature that you're using in your organization. So before I hand it back over to Grace, we'll take another look at another benefit of Specright's patented many-to-many relationships. So here, if we jump into our where used list, we can look at a finished good that's currently in development. So we'll jump into this finished good specification. And we can quickly see that this product has 2 packaging specifications identified. These are 2 of the packaging specs that are going to be used for the development of this product, and one of which is a bottle specification. So if we jump into our bottle specification, we can easily identify compatible specifications that would work with this bottle. So these are 3 closures that have already been validated, vetted. There may even be quality documents that are associated with it or specific material information that's been associated with it that's going to make it a likely choice to be added to our new finished good that we're developing. So this is going to provide you a different level of visibility into all of the granular details that make up these specifications that would allow it to be utilized with your other specification. So I think we've seen a lot in just a short amount of time here. I'll go ahead and pass it back to Grace, and we can quickly review how Specright can help packaging engineers in their day-to-day activities.
Thanks so much, Linda. That was such an insightful demo. As a former packaging engineer, these are Specright's features that have me so excited about our platform. The searchability and traceability feature. Imagine having a Google for your for your packaging specifications. Think about how much time that would save you in your day. The many-to-many relationships feature. Now, when dealing with those tedious BOM changes, the change only has to be made once instead of going into each SKU individually and making that change. This removes human error and mitigates risk. Because Specright can do so much, it gets rid of the portal you have to go into to approve a spec and the folders you have to dig through to get artwork or a die line. With our single source of truth platform, it's all in one place. The component compatibility feature makes selecting components for a new product seamless. And above all, Specright gets into the granular details of a specification, something no other spec system has done before. Before we jump into our Q&A session, I invite you all to take a moment to look at the stats on the right side of the screen and think about how 55 to 65% reduction in duplicate specs, 5 to 10% reduction in packaging components, 80 to 90% reduced data duplication, and 20 to 30% reduced SKU proliferation would save you so much time in your workday. Think about how that 10 to 20% increase in use of reusable packaging would help your company finally meet its sustainability goals, and how that 5 to 10% increase in speed to market could make your company more profitable. With all the value that Specright brings, it's hard to imagine how I ever did my job without it. Who knows, maybe I would still be a packaging engineer. Well, that's it from us. We'll pass it off to you all for Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will make our way through. Let me get to the chat. So question 1, we have, are units in the system able to switch between metric and imperial measurements? Short answer, yes. Mm-hmm. Linda, do you want to touch on that a little
absolutely. Bit? So as we put those in the system, you can certainly trigger, whether or not you're entering in metric or British, and those can all be converted. You probably saw it, maybe it was a little quick on the demo, that you can go ahead, that's going to be on save. Upon save, it'll go ahead and update those different measurements, dimensions, weights, all of that. We work with a lot of global organizations that really require that. And also, as we do a lot of different types of reporting, usually that conversion is a critical element that needs to occur. So great question.
Great. Thank you, Linda. Question 2, can you tell me more about how you connect artwork to the specification?
Yeah. I could take that one. So artwork is such a big part of packaging. It's definitely a piece that we talk to a lot of our customers about. So artwork, with that many-to-many relationship, we really would go ahead and approve a structural specification. So this is going to be great because you're going to have the dimensions, maybe you're going to have the paper spec, everything's going to be related to that structural specification. And then you can have many artworks that are attached to that. Maybe there's a promotional artwork that's using the same structure. And then there's also your core artwork. So artwork is considered its own specification. As we saw that status path across the top of my screen, that would be different it could be different. It doesn't have to be different, but it could be different for every type of packaging specification that you're doing. So when we talk about a regular corrugate spec, the approval statuses may be things like, in progress, under review and approved, whereas artwork may have steps like content approval, legal approval. If you're in the food industry, it may need a nutritionist approval. So artwork may have other statuses that are going to be throughout that path. So we'll then go ahead and we can track any types of files that you need to attach. Files can be attached to all of the different specifications, and then they're going to be viewable by everyone in the organization as well.
Thank you so much for that detailed answer. Mm-hmm. Question 3, where do you keep food safety regulation data similar to sustainable packaging data?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I guess specifically, are we talking about, I guess, follow-up question? I'll give a broad answer, and we can certainly follow up with more information from our team that's working through that. We do have integrations with, the FDA database where we're pushing different information from the FDA with all of your suppliers. They have an FEI number, so that would link some of that information. Other safety information like audit information for your suppliers, if you're going to be doing approvals for your suppliers within the system and tracking their compliance, and make sure they have all of their specified audits. That's something that we would track on that account page with supplier documentation. Certainly there would be approval workflows and potentially quality engineers involved with that. As we look at all the specifications, I should mention that all of the templates that you saw are flexible. So if there are fields specific to different industries, this was more of a generic overview today, but very specific industries like food or cosmetics or CPG may have different fields that they're tracking to be compliant with some of those different requirements.
Awesome, thank you. Question 4, do your customers manage their inventory in this system?
Typically, inventory is something that we would do through an integration. There are certainly ways that we do for several customers track things like lot codes and maybe POs, but typically that's more for ordering information. Typically, inventory is something that we'd want to just connect. We get our spec numbers, and that would just push through from another system. And maybe we can have a one-way connection, or really just we have to know who's pushing and who's pulling the data.
Absolutely. Can you speak more to the full product specification inclusive of product formula, ingredients, and regulatory?
Sure. Just about the connection. Do you think that's more about like how they're connected? So as you build out we were very focused on packaging today, but certainly there's an element when we talk about formulations and that collaboration, or not, collaboration is not the right word, but like how that interacts with the packaging is very important. So there could be that full BOM. We build out the finished good. We'll have a connection to your formula. We'll have a connection to your packaging specification. And then as we look at, quality specifications and testing that needs to occur as you put this with that, there can just be, that would all live and be contained mainly around that finished good spec that you are building. You'll have all of those different connection points there.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer. Another question. Does the system have integrations with any palletization software?
Yeah. So we do have a direct integration with TOPS, different versions of TOPS, the on-prem TOPS workstations that you may have, or we have a light version that actually keeps you within Specright. As you press the TOPS button, as you put in all of your case packs and pallet information, meaning like the specs for the pallet. Is it a wood pallet or is it a plastic pallet? What does that look like? Certainly it would take those specifications and it sends it to the web version of TOPS, and then it'll bring it back into Specright and give you an option of here's the top 5 pallets that are proposed that you could have, but you could also integrate if you currently use TOPS today and would like to integrate with your current instance of TOPS, we could do that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering that, Linda.
Yep.
It looks like we have one last question. Besides ERP connectivity, can you connect to SR and third-party artwork, digital assets, and PIM systems?
Sorry, what was the first part of the question besides?
You mentioned API capabilities. Besides ERP connectivity, can you connect to SR and third-party artwork?
Yeah, we can. So mainly the limitation is just we would just look at whatever systems you're looking at. We do have an open API, so we can connect with a lot of different systems. I mentioned ERP, that's probably a large integration that a lot of people will do because of volumes and things of that nature. But certainly we integrate with TOPS as well. And we have integrations with Trustwell as regards to nutritional fact panels. We also have integrations with artwork providers that we can go ahead and connect to do things like proofing and follow a different checklist and pull artwork back into the system as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Linda. It looks like that was the last question we had. So with that, we'll wrap it up for our webinar today. Before you go, I want to invite you all to join us next month on April 30th for our next edition of Specright Unpacked. I will be joined by a special guest as we continue to dive into Specright and the value it brings to packaging teams across industries. Stay tuned for a registration link coming soon.
Great.
If any additional questions come up or you're interested in diving deeper into the features mentioned today, please contact me directly at grace@specright.com. I can get you connected with the proper team to provide any additional resources you may be looking for. We will also be publishing the recording of this session in the coming days. So stay tuned for that if you would like to look back or share these resources with anybody on your team. Thank you again for joining me today, and we hope to see you in April. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.